Having gone through a formal process for identifying risks, we have seen that the next step in the process is to assess, or what some term evaluate, these identified risks. In the Western Savannah case, completed in Section 2, you place the identified risks in the risk register, which means you are now ready to begin the process of assessing those risks. The aim of the risk assessment stage of the process is to gain an understanding of the nature of each risk and to determine the level of risk that you are going to assign to it. Risk assessment is therefore concerned with assessing both the likelihood and the consequence of individual risks within your project, which then enables a level of risk to be obtained. So what do we mean by likelihood and consequence of risk? Likelihood can be defined as the probability of a risk event occurring. Once the likelihood has been considered, attention should then turn to the consequences should this risk occur. This means you should set the likelihood consideration aside for the moment and try to imagine what would happen should the risk actually trigger. Let's look at a simple example to illustrate both the likelihood and consequence considerations. Take a commercial airline company that undertakes extensive and continuous risk management assessments. As a company, they would want to ensure the safety of customers and crew on all operating flights. Through a risk identification process, two major risks can easily be identified for each flight. One is the risk of a late departure due to a technical issue. The second identified risk is that of a plane crashing due to a technical issue. Whilst the risk of the plane being late for departure may be deemed to be likely to occur, the consequences may be deemed to be quite small, hence a lower risk level. Even though the risk of a plane crash may be deemed as low likelihood of occurrence, we would anticipate catastrophic consequences should it occur. Hence, this would be assessed at a higher risk level. So clearly both risks would end up with different risk levels attached. This is important for decision-making purposes. Essentially, in assessing risks, you are seeking to gain insights into the chances or likelihood of each identified risk occurring. By this, we mean a low, moderate or high chance of occurrence. Once you have considered the likelihood, then you need to put this aside and make a bold assumption that the risk has actually occurred. Then your focus is in trying to anticipate the possible consequences to your project objectives as a result of its occurrence. So in assessing your risks, you are considering what are the chances of occurrence, what are the consequences of occurrence, and what then is the assessed level of risk. Through risk assessment, you are focusing in on analysing those risks and how they are likely to impact on project completion. The assessment phase of the risk management process draws upon the information generated through risk identification and setting the context and objectives. All information deemed from this process should be recorded in the risk register to give us a solid foundation upon which to build the risk assessment criteria, which we will discuss in the next section. So to conclude, risk assessment forms the third phase of the risk management process. The most important takeaway at this point is that this step should follow closely and is integrated with the two previous phases, setting the context and objectives and risk identification. We would now like you to think about the Western Savannah case. How might you categorise the likelihood and consequence of each of the risks already identified in the second week's activity?